In the realm of urban legends and ghostly tales, Halloween stands as a night of playful frights and spooky delights. Yet, amidst the laughter and candy-filled festivities, this hallowed eve has also witnessed the unfolding of chilling crimes that continue to send shivers down the spines of those who recount them. As darkness descends and the world embraces the macabre, we delve into the harrowing depths of three terrifying crimes that unfolded under the cover of Halloween's mystical allure. Join us on a bone-chilling journey through these enigmatic tales, where the boundary between imagination and horror becomes blurred, leaving lasting scars on the souls of those affected. Brace yourself for a glimpse into the sinister side of Halloween, where malevolence reigns and nightmares come to life. This video was made for educational purposes, and all information included in this video are based off my own opinions, and are purely speculation. Number 1. Tainted candy. I'm sure that like most of us, your parents taught you as a child to always check your candy before eating it after you went trick-or-treating on Halloween, but have you ever wondered why we were taught to do that? Well, if you were like most kids, you've probably grew up hearing all kinds of stories. Like the house in that one city involving drug dealers giving kids drug-laced candy, or other horror stories such as the old man that gave out chocolates with broken glass, or even the lady that was giving kids apples embedded with razor blades. And you probably tell yourself that that type of thing happens all the time all over. Well, I'm here to let you know that it don't. And it never had. That all of those stories are just that, stories. They're just stories that are made up to scare children. Well, they all were nothing but myths and legends until the fateful Halloween night of '74, in a small suburb in the state of Texas, when an 8-year-old child named Timothy O'Brien was killed by a poisoned piece of Halloween candy. But this story don't end the way you're thinking. I promise. You see, on Halloween night, way back in 1974, Ronald O'Brien would take his 2 children, Timothy and Elizabeth, trick-or-treating in their neighborhood, and they would be accompanied by their next-door neighbor and his 2 children. And after they collected candy from a handful of houses, they eventually came to a house which the owner of the home wasn't answering their door. So after becoming impatient, the children would go ahead to the next house while Mr. O'Brien stayed behind. He soon would catch back up to the group, and when he did, he pulled out 5 separate large pixie sticks, each about 2 feet in length. He told the group that the homeowner eventually came to the door and that's what they had given him. He gave the 2 neighboring kids each a pixie sticks and also one to each of his own children, and the 5th pixie sticks he gave to a 10-year-old boy whom he recognized from his church. Before going to sleep, Timothy asked if he could eat some of the candy he collected from trick-or-treating that night. His father agreed, and said Timothy chose to eat the pixie sticks. He said Timothy was having trouble extracting the candy powder from the plastic tube, so O'Brien said he helped loosen the powder for him. After Timothy tasted some of the candy, he started to complain, saying that it tasted nasty, and that it had a bitter taste. So O'Brien fetched him a glass of Kool-Aid to wash it down. Just seconds later, Timothy said his belly was hurting and ran to the bathroom. Once in the bathroom, he began to vomit and started convulsing. O'Brien would later claim he then tried holding Timothy while he was vomiting and that Timothy soon went limp in his arms. Timothy O'Brien would die on his way to the hospital, not even an hour after ingesting the pixie sticks candy. Timothy's death from the poisoned candy raised fear in the surrounding community. Numerous parents in Deer Park and the surrounding area turned in the candy that their children collected trick-or-treating that night to the police, fearing it was laced with poison. The detectives on the case did not initially accuse O'Brien of any wrongdoing until Timothy's autopsy report revealed that the pixie sticks he had eaten was laced with a fatal dose of potassium cyanide. 4 out of the 5 pixie sticks O'Brien claimed he had received were recovered by detectives from all of the other children, and thankfully none of them had consumed the poisoned candy. The parents of the 5th child became completely hysterical when they could not locate the candy after being notified by the police. The parents rushed upstairs to find their son asleep, holding the uneaten pixie sticks. The boy had been unable to open the staples that sealed the plastic tubing shut. All 5 of the pixie sticks had been opened and checked for tampering, and found that the top 2 inches were refilled with cyanide powder and resealed with a staple. According to a pathologist who tested the pixie sticks, the candy consumed by Timothy contained enough cyanide to kill 2 adults, while the other 4 candies contained enough to kill 3 to 4 adults. O'Brien initially told police that he couldn't remember which house he got the candy from. Police became suspicious because O'Brien and his neighbor had only taken their children to homes on 2 streets because it had been raining. Their suspicions grew after learning that none of the homes they visited had given out pixie sticks. After walking the neighborhood with investigators 3 times, O'Brien eventually led detectives to the home where no one had answered the door. O'Brien said that he went back before catching up with the group. He said the owner of the home did not turn the lights on, but did crack the door open and hand him 5 pixie sticks. He said he only seen the man's arm, which he described as being hairy. The home was owned by a man named Courtney Melvin. Melvin was an air traffic controller at William P. Hobby Airport and did not get home from work until 11 p.m. on Halloween night. Police ruled Melvin out as a suspect when over 200 people confirmed that he had been at work that night. Soon after the investigation began, investigators figured out that O'Brien was over $100K in debt, which is around $600K in today's money. They also would learn that in the last 10 years leading up to the murder, O'Brien would go through 21 different jobs. And at the time of his arrest, O'Brien was suspected of stealing from his job and was close to being fired from Texas State Optical, and to top things off, his car was soon to be repoed. Also, he had defaulted on more than a couple of bank loans, and the family home had been foreclosed on. So to say the least, he was pretty much in financial ruin. Investigators also discovered that O'Brien had taken out life insurance policies on both of his children in the months before Timothy's death. In January of 1974, he had taken out a $10,000 life insurance policy on each of his children. Each $10,000 policy would be equivalent to a $60,000 policy in today's world. Then just a month before Timothy's demise, O'Brien would take out an additional $20,000 on both of his children's policies despite the objections made by his life insurance agency. In the days preceding Timothy's death, O'Brien had taken out yet another $20,000 policy on each child. Talk about being super suspicious, right? O'Brien's wife would maintain her innocence, that she did not know anything about the insurance policies on her children's lives. Police also learned that on the morning after Timothy's death, O'Brien had called his insurance company to inquire about collecting the policies he had taken out on his son. O'Brien would visit a chemical supply store in Houston to buy cyanide shortly before Halloween. But he left empty-handed after learning the smallest amount available to purchase was 5 pounds. That's when police really began to suspect that Ronald O'Brien had laced the pixie sticks with the poison in an effort to kill his own children just to collect on their life insurance policies. Like, wow, how awful is that? Like, some people are just truly evil. And investigators believe his motive for giving the other children pixie sticks was just an effort to cover up his crime. Police repeatedly questioned O'Brien, but he maintained his innocence. Even though detectives never found when or where O'Brien bought the poison, he was still arrested and charged with his son's murder on November 5 of 1974. He was indicted on 1 count of capital murder, and he would also be indicted on 4 counts of attempted murder. O'Brien entered a plea of not guilty to all 5 counts. O'Brien's trial began in Houston on May 5, 1975. During the trial, a chemist who was acquainted with O'Brien testified that sometime in the summer of 1973, O'Brien called him asking about cyanide and how much would be fatal to a human being. Also, a chemical supply salesman testified that O'Brien had asked him how to buy cyanide. Friends and co-workers testified that in the months before Timothy's death, O'Brien showed an unusual interest in cyanide and spoke about how much it would take to kill a person. O'Brien's sister-in-law and brother-in-law testified in court that on the day of Timothy's funeral, O'Brien spoke of using the money from Timothy's insurance policy to take a long vacation and buy other things he seemed all too excited to buy. Also, O'Brien's wife stated that O'Brien forced Timothy to choose the pixie sticks and wouldn't allow him to choose another piece of candy on that fateful night. But O'Brien continued to maintain his innocence. His defense mainly drew upon the decades-old urban legend about a mad poisoner, who hands out Halloween candy laced with poison, or needles, or candy apples with razor blades, despite the fact that there are no documented instances of strangers poisoning Halloween candy ever in the history of trick-or-treating before this case. It would only take the jury 46 minutes to find O'Brien guilty of capital murder. And on June 3, 1975, the jury would take another 71 minutes to sentence O'Brien to death. Number 2. The Man in the Mask. This case takes us to Fort Dodge, Iowa, 1982. Just as trick-or-treating was coming to an end, Halloween night, 69-year-old Marvin Brandland and his wife Ethel heard a knock on their door. They answered the door and were shocked to see a grown man wearing a mask that said, "Trick or treat, give me your money or I'll shoot." The Brandlands thought someone was playing a bad joke, so Marvin tried to remove the man's mask, but he wouldn't let him. Instead, the masked man pushed his way inside the house and pulled out a gun. He then demanded that the couple bring him down to the basement and give him all the money they had stashed in their safe. The Brandlands became very suspicious since very few people knew they even had a safe in their basement. For this reason, Marvin was still convinced that a friend or family member was simply playing a terrible trick on them. When the masked man led the Brandlands through the kitchen toward the basement, Marvin made a move for the gun. This turned out to be a fatal mistake. Because in the struggle, the intruder ended up shooting Marvin in the throat before fleeing the house and inexplicably leaving his mask behind. Ethel was so traumatized by her husband's death that she died just a couple of months later. Over the years, an acquaintance of the Brandland family had allegedly bragged about committing the murder, so DNA testing was performed on the mask. But there wasn't enough usable material for a DNA test, so there is still no evidence to charge this suspect. So to this very day Marvin Brandland's murder remains unsolved. Number 3. The Baby Snatcher. This one takes place on Halloween night, 1977, in Lawton, Oklahoma. This is where 19-month-old Nema Louise Carter laid sound asleep in her crib. But when the parents of the 19-month-old checked in on the baby the following morning, they were astonished to find the crib empty and their daughter missing. But investigators found that the windows in Nema's bedroom were locked, and so were the doors to the house, and there was no indication of forced entry anywhere around the home, so the theory was that her kidnapper had to have been hiding in the closet when they laid the baby down, and sneaked the child out of the house while her parents were asleep in the living room. Just a month later, a few kids from the neighborhood were playing in an abandoned house about 4 or 5 blocks away from the Carter home. When they opened up the house's fridge, they were stunned when the decomposed body of a baby came falling out. The child was later identified as Nema Louise Carter, who they believed died of suffocation. The discovery of the baby's death was eerily familiar for investigators. And the feeling they had came from another case that's wounds were quite recent for the detectives. Because, just a year earlier, a similar crime had occurred in Lawton, in April 1976, when twin sisters, Mary and Tina Carpenter, aged 3, were lured out of their home by a young woman and forcibly confined inside a refrigerator at another abandoned house. When the sisters were found 2 days later, Mary had suffocated, but Tina managed to survive. The horrifying and traumatic ordeal. Afterwards, Tina identified her abductor as a local teenage babysitter named Jacqueline Rabideaux. But, the child being so young, made her testimony unreliable, so the state said because of the lack of evidence that they wouldn't be filing charges at that time. And yeah, you guessed it, Jacqueline Rubidoux eventually became a babysitter for Nima Louise Carter. She was an obvious suspect after Nima's murder, but once again, there was no evidence to implicate her. Years later, Rubidoux would finally be charged with Mary Carpenter's murder, and given a life sentence. And she would die a painful death in prison, from liver cancer in 2005, but of course she would never admit to the still unsolved murder of baby Nima Louise Carter. As the final notes of Halloween's haunting melody fade into the night, we are left grappling with a chilling reality. The tales of terror that unfolded on this fateful night have etched themselves into the collective consciousness, forever altering the perception of a once-beloved holiday. These three terrifying crimes serve as a stark reminder that evil can wear a disguise, lurking amidst the festivities. As we gather our courage and seek solace in the dawn of a new day, let us remember the victims, their families, and the resilience of a community shaken to its core. May this unsettling chapter in Halloween's history inspire us to fortify our bonds, embrace compassion, and ensure that the spirit of this cherished holiday remains untainted by darkness.